Okay, great. So this morning, the title of the message that I'm bringing you today is called In the Waiting. And this is a season that we're all either going into or in the middle of or transitioning out of and into another season of waiting. So it's like constant season of waiting in our lives. But she's so sweet. So I just want to tell you guys the season that I'm in right now is actually a season of waiting, and I feel God transitioning me from one season to the next. But Aaron and I actually moved here about 10 years ago, which, by the way, this book, when we first moved here, I let Pastor borrow a book 10 years ago. It actually has a message to me on the inside from the person who sent it to me from Ireland. And so I was back there in his office, and I found it. It's never been opened. So if you're missing a book, it's probably in the bottom shelf in his office. But the person who wrote it to me, I was actually in a different season where I actually was planning on moving to Ireland. This is like 15 years ago. And be on staff at a ministry program out in Ireland. I was asked to come out and do that. But the person who wrote the message, I haven't read the message in over 10 years. And in one part, the person says, "Take time to breathe and rest in Him." And I thought, man, if that is not God speaking this morning, I don't know what is, because it is perfect. So I'm actually going to read it this time, 10 years later. But the current season that I'm in right now, when Pastor says multiple degrees, all that really means is I can make a killer spreadsheet. That's it. So when we first moved here, I decided I was going to go to school because I didn't really know what I was supposed to do. I just knew that God called us here. We got loaded up a really small U-Haul and drove 13 hours straight and been here ever since, and decided to go to school. All I knew is that God had called us here. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, or I didn't know. Aaron started leading worship immediately, like the night we rolled into town. Yeah, Mary can tell you all about it. Yes. So that's definitely a God thing. And so I went to school, years go by, praying, reading the Bible, still doing what I was doing before. I get through school with associate's degree in respiratory therapy and applied science, and I needed to go take a board exam because today it doesn't matter if you graduated on the dean's list or have a 4.0. Unless you can pass a board exam, that degree means nothing. Whatever. I'm just going to stop it there. But I went to go take my board exams for respiratory therapy, and I know that we have some in here, but I didn't pass. And I thought, well, maybe something's wrong. I missed it by one question. And so I kept taking the board exam over and over. I'd miss it by 2 and 1 question. So frustrating, because you also have to pay for the exam every time you retake it. And then somebody said to me, "I think God's calling you to do something else." And I said, "No, He is not. I know He called me to do this. I'm paying for it. I'm going to pass this exam." So I paid to take special courses that teach you how to take the test, because the questions have nothing to do with what you learned in school, surprisingly. If you're in the medical field, you can agree, yes. The unicorn jumped over the bridge. What's his blood pressure? I don't know. So, and all the questions are correct. There's just one that's even more correct. So I took it in numerous times, and I was in denial that God was calling me to do something else, a new season. And then finally, after a couple times and a few checks later, I said, "Okay, fine, God, I'll just keep going to school and keep trying, but I'll just do something else." And so I applied I could get a job but not in that field, so I got a job at the emergency department at UVA, and still going to school, but kind of a little bit in denial that I wasn't supposed to be doing that, and just kept trucking. And then eventually you stop reading your Bible because God called you to do something else, and you don't really want to hear it because you've already invested so much into the first path he was taking you. And so, if I'm shaking, it's because I had like 3 cups of coffee. I don't know what's going on. So then I got promoted from the emergency department to neuroscience and behavioral health, and administration, project management, for a hospital-wide task force that oversees situational violent events and workplace violence. And I'm starting UVA's project management program starting in 2019 so that I can do that. I'm excited. I know that didn't seem like it, but I am. But when I've always felt more fulfilled doing actual ministry, like talking to people about God. And sitting in office, that's fun, not really. But to me, I'm more fulfilled when I can do something for God. And somebody told me last week, they said, you know what, your job, it can be your ministry. And I was like, yeah, but I don't feel like it is. So a couple months ago, I was like, I really want to just talk about God and what God's doing in people's lives. And so started a podcast, and Pastor talked about that a couple weeks ago. And so I really feel like in that direction, that's the way we're supposed to go. That's where I'm supposed to go. So that's where I am. But and now I'm in a different direction, doing what God's asked me to do. But during these times, like I just feel I would get a little bitter about God changing the direction. Because I'm like, God, I've already invested so much in this. Why are you asking me to change now? Because I feel like I've just wasted time. And God's like, you didn't waste your time. You're doing I had to take you in this path to get you to this left turn here. And then I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see the bigger picture. So today, I'm going to talk about Sarah and Abraham. Because during this season, when I was in denial about God changing my direction, there was a period of time, a couple months, where I really felt like I couldn't hear God because I had shut off that connection. I was praying to him, but I wasn't reading my Bible really, and I just quit. But I was still, serving God. And one night, I just broke down, and I was like, God, I feel like I can't hear you anymore. And then weeks go by, and I'm like, fine, you know what? I'm coming after you with all I've got because you're all I've ever known. And you're all I've ever trusted, God, is you. And so I don't know anything else. And so I felt God say, I need you to read about Abraham. And I'm like, I've already read about Abraham. I know about Abraham. He said, just read it. So I didn't read it. Don't look at me like that. You do that too. And so I started reading about Abraham. Well, no, I didn't. I said I didn't. And then I turned on my iTunes, and I said, Siri, I want to listen to worship music. Okay. The first song that plays, I don't know if it's because it was alphabetical order, but I'm going to say it's God. The song Abraham from Josh Baldwin starts playing. No, thank you, Siri. So a couple of weeks later, it happens again. I said, fine, you know what? I'll just do it. I even say shuffle, Siri. Shuffle the music. Abraham. Thanks. Siri can be used by God too. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to read about Abraham. I already know the story. I feel like I'm wasting my time. And then what I found when I was reading about Abraham is that God didn't want me to know about Abraham because I already knew about Abraham. He wanted me to learn about Sarah. Because Sarah and I could have been best friends. If she had a Facebook, we probably would be best friends. But I know that a lot of people already know a lot about Sarah. Sarah couldn't have a baby. or she was barren, and then when she was old, God gave her a child. But there's so much more to that story. And a lot of times it can be overshadowed by Abraham. So let's talk about Sarah. Sarah was beautiful, so beautiful that when she was traveling with Abraham, when they would go into a new city, Abraham would tell everyone that she was his sister. Because culturally, if your wife was beautiful, people could kill you and take your wife. But the brother, he was sort of like the father figure. So when somebody wanted to marry a woman during this time, they would go to her brother, and her brother would oversee the arrangements, if it was appropriate, if it was okay. And so the brother was more powerful than the husband. So don't ask my brothers. Just kidding. But so she was so beautiful that's even in her older age, she was still smoking. Sarah was a foster mom. Surprise! When Abraham's brother died, they actually took Lot, his nephew, in. And Sarah raised Lot as her own son. I thought that was legit because Aaron and I are new approved foster parents. So I was like, oh my gosh, God, hello. Sarah was the only woman in the Bible whose name was changed by God. That is cool. So she was, I think it's called Sarai, because it's Sarai. Yeah, you can totally leave that up there. But God changed her name from Sarai to Sarah. And she was from the city of Ur. Yeah, there's a picture of what some researchers had researched the city of Ur, and that's what they believe that it looked like. And that temple is actually still there today, which is very cool. If you Google it, you could still see the temple. But the city of Ur was a royal city. It was full of corruption, a lot like cities today, but it was a royal city. She was a city girl. Don't let this accent fool you, because I love the city. I love it. And so she was used to the city life. She was used to, if she needed bread, she could go buy bread. She didn't have to make it. She wanted vegetables. She didn't have to grow it. She could go down to the market and buy it because it was that simple. And when God called Abraham and Sarah to leave Ur to follow God's promise, I'm going to take you to Genesis 12, 1 through 5. Oh, yeah. Well, go back to that last slide. The city of Ur is actually in Iraq. And it's where that red dot is, and it's where the Euphrates River is and the Tigris River almost meet. So it was great for shipping and receiving. So, yeah, that's where it is. Kind of give you an idea of where Ur was. And so I'm going to take you to Genesis 12, 1 through 5. The Lord had said to Abraham, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. Now, that's important because Abraham didn't know what the promise looked like. He just knew that God would eventually show him what it was. And he said, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All of the families on earth will be blessed through you. And so that's important because, like I said, Abraham didn't know what the promise was. He just knew that God would eventually show him. And to me, I'm a very performance-oriented person. If I don't see progress, I get real shook. Like, I start getting impatient and frustrated, and I need to calm down because I've got to have results, and I thrive on them. For example, my senior year in high school, if you guys haven't met my mom, you're missing out. Next time she comes up here, she lives in Texas, but next time she comes up to visit, make sure you say hi to her because she is a very unique person. The last time she visited, I called Aaron. I said, Aaron, have you picked my mom up from the airport? He said, well, if she's the one in the purple felt jumpsuit, the white go-go boots, and the fringed jacket, yes, I have your mom. That's her. That's her. She is the most selfless person I've ever met in my life. She has very little, and she would give it all away in a heartbeat. And she does, actually. When we were growing up, she didn't just make dinner for 3 kids. She made dinner for all the kids in the neighborhood because we grew up in a very, very poor area. And so a lot of the kids' parents, they either were passed out on drugs, honestly, or their parents didn't really care where they were. And so my mom opened the house to all the kids in the neighborhood, so I had lots of brothers and sisters. And we all went to school together, we all graduated together. But my senior year in high school, I knew that God had called me to move away my senior year. And I had I was pretty sneaky my senior year, because I decided that, well, I only have 2 classes left to take. And you take your classes every other day, so I set it up so I only had 1 class a day. And they were 30-minute classes. Home ec, and I don't even know what the other one was, because I didn't go. And so I was like, well, I know God's calling me away. I got work. When I was 16, my aunt bought me a very nice Mustang. It didn't last long, because in this story, it got taken away by my mom. So I missed school, and I was skipping school. I wasn't doing anything bad. I was sleeping because I had to work that evening to pay for insurance on my car and to save up money so I could move away and do what God had called me to do. I didn't need to be in high school. Are you kidding me? High school's for kids. I'm 18. Well, the school, they didn't call CPS because I'd missed school. They called my mom because they knew who my mom was. And plus I was an adult, so I get home that afternoon, and I roll up in the driveway, and when I do, I notice the garage door's open. My mom had cleaned out the garage, and the only thing in the garage was a chair facing the road. And I thought, this is really strange. What's going on? And then she walks out like this. Get out of the car. Get out. You're going to die. So I was like, okay, I can either drive off, but I would eventually have to come back because all my stuff's here. And I'm 18, and my stuff means everything to me. So I get out of the car. She takes my car keys. I'm not going to tell you what she did to me because I still need therapy for it. But just kidding. She took my car keys away. And mind you, this is like 2 months into my senior year. She took my car keys away. She went down to the junkyard and bought a $50 Cutlass Caprice that was rusted out. The ceiling was caving. It was not street legal. But even the cops knew my mom. They were not going to pull her over in that car because she also didn't even have a driver's license. They didn't care. Oh, that's Mrs. Malone. Keep on going. So every day my senior year, not only did I have lunch detention, I had to be dropped off, not at the senior door entrance. Mind you, I went to a very large high school. There were over 600 kids in my class. There was a lot of kids there. Not at the junior door entrance. She dropped me off at the freshman door entrance in this loud, rusted out, obvious car. That will humble you so quick. Oh, you got a Mustang. Not no more. It's parked in my garage that I cleaned out. I didn't get it back till graduation day because she didn't think I was going to graduate. She let me drive it to graduation, and then I flew out the next day. So I got to drive it one day. But the whole point of that is during this season, I thought I didn't need a process. I already know what I'm supposed to do. I'm just going to go and do it. I don't need to learn anything along the way. I don't need to answer to anybody except God because God's called me to do it. And that's that. And the thing is that everyone goes through a season or in a season where God's called you to do something, and it's been years, it's been decades since you've gotten any other direction. And this is a very critical season in your life. This is also a very dangerous season in your life because decisions could be made that could ruin it, can change it, but I've got awesome keys to help you along that way. So everyone can survive these long seasons by taking 3 actions. Now, this is the season between God has encountered you, he's impacted your life, and then actually seeing the fruit. These are long seasons. So the process of your promise will depend on these 3 actions. Now, the promise that Abraham received was also for Sarah, because the promise could not come to fruition unless it came through Sarah. And so Sarah, it was really up to Sarah that's a lot on Sarah's shoulders, to carry this promise and wait and take these 3 actions. Your process will depend on your ability to pursue obedience. Genesis 16, 1 through 4. There we go. It feels so weird having a paper Bible. Okay, 16, 1 through 4. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had not been able to bear children for him. Now mind you, God's given them the promise. Years have gone by, and they're out walking around, going to where God's called them to go. Sarah's probably tired by now. She's probably had enough. She probably doubts God. But she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. Now Sarah said to Abraham, the Lord has prevented me from having children. She's blaming God because her promise has not come to fruition. She's not even thinking that there's time. Why? Because she's already elder. So she tells her servant to go and sleep with her husband because then he can have a child. Abraham agreed. So Sarah, Abraham's wife, Hagar, he took the servant and gave, it says here, this happened 10 years after Abraham had settled in the land. So this is 10 years from the time God called them out. That's a long time. And the thing is that this is actually culturally acceptable back then. It was acceptable that if you could not bear children, that your servant or your maid could sleep with your husband and then bear children. But this was not a God thing. Even though it was culturally acceptable, it was not what God wanted. Sarah was rushing the process because it had not come to pass in the time frame that she was wanting. In this moment, she stopped trusting God with the pace of the process. We have to trust God with the pace of the process because rush will lead to ruin. It will always lead to ruin. And you risk stepping into something that God has not yet given you. And now it's tainted, it's ruined. But God used her ruin, her impatience, to remind her and Abraham that the promise could still only come through Sarah. Okay, so the maid has a boy. God says, that's not the promise. That's not what I was asking of you, or that's not what I've promised you. All right, so Sarah's screwed up. How many times have we rushed into something that we know that God's given us and we messed it up? Now it's messy. Great, we've ruined it. God's going to not use me anymore. He's going to give the promise to somebody else. That in that moment, God used her ruin, her impatience, to remind them that the promise was still through Sarah. The promise is still there for you. 10 years in, 20 years in, 50 years in, the promise is still there. God did not take it away. In fact, God redeemed her and changed her name to Sarah. So that's when he changed her name. And it says, and I will bless her and give her a son. I will bless her richly, and she will become the mother of many nations. Kings of nations will be among her descendants. Okay, God's given her a new promise. Well, it's the same promise, just renewed it. All right, God, I got it. Here I go. Let's do this again. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to praise and worship in the car on the way to work. I'm following God. More years go by. So fast forward to many years later. Okay, so we're going to go to Genesis 18 because now we're many years later. And by this point, Sarah and Abraham, do you have there should be a slide with a map that says Abraham's journey. Okay, mind you, Sarah's a city girl, and they're traveling. Look at this. This is a satellite version. This isn't like, oh, here's a little map. This is a satellite vision from country to country. They are walking, riding camels, riding donkeys, and it's not just them. They've got a whole caravan. They've got all their stuff. They've got all their livestock. They've got all their servants. They have everyone, and they're trekking. And Sarah's a city girl. She don't like this. Don't like this one bit. She wants to Uber, but she can't because she's walking with her husband. And she wants to get there. So here in chapter 18, you see that Sarah's in the tent and Abraham's outside. I don't know why. I wanted to know why. Why is Abraham outside? They're probably fighting. She's probably had enough. I don't know. She's very sassy. I like her. And so Abraham's sitting outside and he sees God coming. And Abraham says, "My Lord, if it pleases you, stop here for a while. Rest in the shade of this tree and rest in the shade of the tree while water is brought to you to wash your feet. And since you've honored your servant with this visit." See, Abraham was just excited about the visit. The promise isn't here, but God's here. "Let me prepare some food to refresh you before you continue on your journey." God said, "All right, go do it." So Abraham goes, and he tells his people to slaughter the greatest calf, and so they do, and he goes in the tent, and he says, "Sarah, make some bread, God's here." I'm sure she wanted to smack him because, I don't know, walking everywhere, and you want me to make some bread? Go ask the servant. Oh, that's right, she ran away with your other son. I mean, she's just really sassy, okay? I like her. So, okay, it takes a long time to prepare this. And so Abraham's sitting in the shade with God, and God looks over at Abraham and says, "Where's your wife, Sarah?" God knew where she was. And Abraham stops and he says, "She's in the tent." Okay. So then God starts speaking, and he says, he's talking loud because he knows Sarah's listening. She's a woman. She knows what's going on. He says, "I will return to you this time next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son." See, it even says Sarah was listening. See, she's a woman. Of course she was. To this conversation from the tent. See, Abraham and Sarah were both very old by this time. Sarah was long past the age of having children. So she laughed silently to herself. She's probably mocking. And she says, "How could a worn-out woman like me enjoy such pleasure, especially when my master, my husband, is so old too?" You see this? Like, she is sassy. It says, "Then the Lord said to Abraham," because God hears, he knows. He knows when you're grumbling. He knows when you're mocking and laughing, but he's still there. He says, "Why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, 'Can an old woman like me have a baby?' Is there anything too hard for God? I will return this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." And then Sarah was afraid because she knew that God had heard her laugh. So she denied it, said, "I didn't laugh. But the Lord said, no, you did. I heard you. You see, Abraham and Sarah are so different, but they're so similar. See, Abraham, he just wanted the presence of God. He knew that there was a promise, but he was willing to settle just for a visit. God, just speak to me. God, just show up. Just don't pass me by. Sarah wanted the promise. See, when God himself even said the promise, she still didn't trust him. She laughed. We have to trust God with the pace of the process. We need to rest assured that even if we mess up, when we want immediate results, we live in an age where immediate results are amazing. Amazon Prime, next day delivery, the like button. You know what I'm talking about. God will never leave you or give your promise to somebody else. He gave it to you. It's for you because you are unique and you are made exactly how God needed you to be made. All right. So where do we go from here? Genesis 21, 1 through 2. The Lord kept his word, surprise, Sarah, and did for Sarah exactly what he promised. She became pregnant. She gave birth to a son. For Abraham in his old age, this happened at just the time God said it would. Surprising, huh? So now they have the promise, right? They've got this tangible thing they can hold on to. It's their son. It's the promise. The process is over, right? You know better than that. When the promise comes to fruition, that does not mean the process is complete. It's not the end of the story. So God's giving you your promise, but now it's time to start another process. And this leads to our next point. See, another action that it's going to depend on is your ability to permit redirection. Because there's going to be divine expirations in the process that are going to make you change where you're going. There's going to be a time for what you're doing to end so that you can go to the next thing. And this point right here where we permit redirection, this is the everyday grind. In doing what God has asked me to do before why I see he has asked me to do it is faith. In Hebrews 11:1, it says, faith is the substance of things hoped. Abraham had a promise. He didn't know what that looked like. He just hoped for it. And then in Genesis 22, God asked him to sacrifice that promise. Well, what do you mean sacrifice my promise? I have been waiting years and years, God. I'm older. This is what you've given me. I'm not letting go. This is what you've given me. My job, my family, everything. We've worked so hard for this. But Abraham, he was so willing to do whatever God asked. So God asked him to sacrifice his son. In Genesis 22, it says, when they arrived at the place where God had told them to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged wood on it. Then he tied his son, Isaac. You know, I always wonder what was going through Isaac's mind. Like, were him and God like in cahoots? Like, did he know what was going on? Because he didn't run for it. I mean, my kid would have realized it and took off, screaming, calling the police. And Abraham packed up his knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, at the exact time that God had promised, well, he didn't promise Abraham, but he said, at that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, hey, Yes, Abraham replied. Here I am. Don't lay a hand on that boy, Abraham. See, Abraham with full intention was obeying God. Excuse me, I just spit. Was obeying God, going in the direction that he had asked, and he was going to do exactly what he asked him to do, exactly how he asked him to do it. And if he was not listening to God's redirection, the promise would have been sacrificed. In the midst of Abraham's obedience, God gave him new direction, and Abraham permitted the redirection. I mean, thank God. Thank God for Isaac's sake, right? Day by day, step by step, God has to be in charge of the steps. The grind. I go to work. I come home. Feed the kids. Dinner. Take care of the house. You know exactly who Sarah is. But if we get caught up in a moment or a season and don't permit the redirection, you get stuck. And years will pass by and you'll wonder what happened to God. It doesn't mean that you're going the wrong way when God redirects you. He had to put you in this direction to take a left or a right or jump, I don't know, swim. We don't just see the right hand or the right turn coming up. You're willing to go, but are you willing to stop and reroute? That's so hard because we want to hold on to it. Abraham was willing to sacrifice the promise of God, but God stopped him and changed the path. During the process, God at any time, for any reason, will change the process and or the pace. Chances are he will, chances are that he will, chances are that he won't. Because chances are the promise is to mold you into the person that's going to walk into the promise. So here we are, pursuing obedience, permitting redirection. The next key during this very critical process in our lives, this very critical time in the waiting, is to preserve hope. That's really hard because Abraham, even though he held on to God and he was so resilient. Well, we think he's resilient, but God had, if you read scripture, God had to come down 2 times to remind him what the promise was. Abraham said, God, I'm old. My wife's old. Where are you? And then God had to come down and say, Abraham, here's your promise, buddy. Keep up the good work. We have to be reminded sometimes. I'll tell you what's easy for me to keep. I say what's easy for me to keep hope. I'm human. It's not easy. I like to hang on to something tangible that reminds me of the promise. So about 11 or so years ago, we lived in Clearwater, Florida, and our pastor, I was at the front for some reason during a church service, and the pastor gave a prophecy over me. It's the only time I've ever had a prophecy. I'm not going to tell you what it is, because it hasn't come to pass yet. Maybe one day. But that next week, we went to a convention, and the pastor there that was leading the convention, he handed out these chess pieces to everyone in the crowd. And he talked about the promise of God, the King. And what do you do to protect that hope? What do you do to preserve that hope in the process? And he said, I want you to take these chess pieces and I want you to hang on to it. And I want it to be a constant reminder to protect the heart of the King. Because in chess, you have to protect the king. So he handed out these pieces. I still have that piece. And every day, I think about it. It's been like 11 or 12 years, and I still think about it. My hope, if I can just look at it or if I can just hold it, then I'm reminded. It sounds so cheesy. Like, you need something tangible to hang on to. But it makes it so much easier to remind ourselves. I was given a promise. I need to stay hopeful that it's going to come to pass. Even when I'm tired, I don't want to do this anymore. It's so much easier to just quit. God will show up whenever he wants to. But it's so much greater when you're reaching out and saying, God, I'm protecting this promise because I know you're going to show up in your own time, and I'm going to come after you with everything I've got because you're all I've got and you're all I've ever had. I was invited to church when I was in second grade, so my son's age. And I have to be careful about what I say because my mom might watch this. Had a rough childhood. It was really up to my grandparents to take care of us. I walked to church. I think I was 8. Walked to church. Just shouldn't happen when you're 8. But I walked to church with my friends, and I came to give my life to God on July 4th, 1998, so it's been over 20 years. And a rough childhood. There were drugs, there were people in and out of the house. Life was rough, man. And I'll never forget saying and praying to God at such a young age, God, you're all I've got. That's deep. And when all I've got is hope, when all I've got is a promise that one day this is somehow going to get better, the grind, I have no way out of this except you, God. This is the process. I hate the process. I hate it so much. But somehow, some way, God has to intervene because this is all I've got. I was telling somebody, I don't remember what I was telling them, but I said, I just know that all things work together for the good of those who love God and pursue God. And they said, how can you say that right now? And I responded, that's all I've ever known. I don't know anything else. Because even when it was at its worst, that's all I had was God. This was all I had. I didn't even have a phone I could read this on. I had to open it. That's it. That's all I had. So God has to come through because I'm depending everything on God. Everything's on the line for God right now. And if he doesn't come through, I don't know what's going to happen. He always comes through. So I have hope that that's going to happen. So keep something. Keep something that reminds you when you're in the grind of everyday life, God has a promise. All things work together. I have faith that there's going to be another side to this and God's going to show up. That the crazy thing about it is that the promise is never a place. The promise is never a thing. The promise is always Jesus. Abraham and Sarah waited years during the process to receive what they thought was a tangible thing, a human being. But the actual promise wasn't that at all. He told Sarah, she's going to be the mother of nations, kings. The actual promise was a people, generations serving Jesus. Fast forward thousands of years, and those people are you and me. You're looking at Abraham's promise. Here we are in a building serving and worshiping Jesus. It's full circle. Isn't that crazy? Are you in the promise, in the process? Do you feel the way Sarah did? Cynical, apathetic? I did. Like God had forgotten you, that you were insignificant, that you messed up. Shouldn't have done that. God's not surprised. He was there before you made the mistake. He's there after. He's there during. He already saw it before it happened. He's not surprised. He's not shocked. He's not surprised or shocked that you're cynical, that you're mad, you're angry at him for some reason, or that you're just kind of going on, whatever. If God shows up, he shows up. If not, I'm still going to go to work tomorrow. Do you feel like you've rushed the process and taken it into your own actions? He never left. He's never going to leave. And his promises will be renewed, just as he renewed them in Sarah and in Abraham. God did not forget you. He does not. He knows you're here. He's not surprised that you came to church today. He's not surprised when you complain. He knows. Go ahead and stand up. This is what God's given me. I don't know who you are, but there's somebody here you feel tired. You're tired of faking it, like you're trusting. God knows. He feels you. So this morning, if you need somebody to just talk to you about it, to hear what you've got to say, we've got an amazing prayer team. I don't know if you've seen this wall over here and you've read the prayer requests on there, but there's some powerful things on there. They pray for them. You should too. God, you are so good. We thank you for this word, God. Thank you for the process, even as painful and as terrible as it can be, but also redundant. God, I pray that your Spirit would move through every seat, God, because there's somebody here that needs to know you're going to make it. And then when you get to the other side, you'll be able to say, you won't believe what God brought me through. God is here for you. We are here for you. The very people that God promised to Abraham and Sarah are in this room. If you've never had an encounter with God and you want to know what it's like to have hope, then there will be a team here waiting for you. God, I pray that hope will rise, God, because you're in the midst of our waiting, God. You're in the midst of our impatience. God, as we leave today, I pray that your Spirit, God, will be right next to everyone as they drive out, walk out, bike out, whatever. And I pray, God, that everyone in this room will find something to hold on to remind them of the hope that's found in you, God, the never failing hope. Your word says, God, We love you, Lord, and we praise you, God. If you want somebody to pray with, come down here, pray. We'll have some nice music playing for you. There is hope. Be with God. Thank you.